So there's a character in the Scooby-Doo universe who by basically every popular opinion on earth is considered the most annoying thing ever put on television. And that's not even me being dramatic, that's just kind of the consensus. Ask somebody who watched cartoons in the 80s, ask someone who didn't, doesn't matter. They'll usually tell you the same thing. Scrappy-Doo sucked, Scrappy-Doo ruined Scooby-Doo, and whoever signed off on that little freak should have been tackled in the parking lot. Alright, maybe not that one. And look, I get it, I do. Scrappy-Doo is loud, he's obnoxious, his little catchphrase gets old almost immediately. He just doesn't seem to understand what makes Scooby-Doo work in the first place. The whole appeal of Scooby-Doo is that these people are scared out of their minds. They don't want to take on the monster, they're just there to solve the mystery. Shaggy and Scooby would rather be anywhere else, but somehow, against their will, they end up in the middle of it all anyway. That's the whole fun of the show. But then you add Scrappy, and his whole approach is basically, okay, but have we considered just jumping the monster? Matter of fact, where's he at? Let me just handle it. Which is funny the first few times, but then it gets old real quick. And the craziest part about all this that people never bring up when they talk about Scrappy-Doo. When he showed up in 1979, the ratings actually went up, and not a little bit. Enough that the show got renewed, enough that the people in charge looked at the numbers and said, yeah, okay, more of that, more Scrappy. So for a little while, Scrappy-Doo wasn't a mistake, he was the fix. And then he slowly broke the whole thing.
Uncle Scooby? Hi, I'm Scrappy-Doo.
Scrappy-Doo?
To get to why Scrappy-Doo exists at all, you kind of have to understand what Hanna-Barbera was by the late 70s. And by that point, Hanna-Barbera was basically a factory. William Hanna and Joseph Barbera had built a studio around speed, repetition, and figuring out how to get the absolute most out of the least amount of animation possible. Which, to be clear, is not me calling them lazy. That was the whole game. You hold a character still, move the mouth, reuse a background, cycle a walk, save money, and keep it moving. That's limited animation, which sounds insulting, but for television, it was genius.
We were able to do a 5-minute cartoon with 1,200 drawings instead of 26,000 drawings. But that was by necessity. That's to stay alive. And, you know, it didn't make that much difference.
Cheap, fast, efficient, and most importantly, it worked. The problem is, once you build a machine like that, that machine has to keep spitting stuff out, constantly. And to do that, you need a show people actually keep watching. Scooby-Doo was one of the big ones. That thing has been around since 1969. It already had spin-offs, merch, it had records, it had lunchboxes. Scooby wasn't just some cartoon they had lying around, it was one of their major properties. So when ratings started slipping in the late 70s, that's not just a creative problem, that's a business problem. And once something becomes a business problem, people start trying to fix it very fast.
Jeepers! Jinkies!
Mark Evner, who helped develop Scrappy, has talked about his time at Hanna-Barbera in interviews and on his blog, and the version he tells is honestly way less complicated than you'd expect. It's not some big master plan, it's just a room full of people looking at a problem and coming up with what sounds, on paper, like a pretty reasonable fix.
Scooby-Doo had been on for, you can figure out how many years before Scrappy came about better than I can. But ABC was thinking maybe it's run its course, maybe. Now, in hindsight, it's silly to think that after that few years, Scooby was, you know, it seems to be invulnerable. It comes back every 20 weeks with a new format and a new slant on it, a new version of it. But back then, ABC was saying, maybe we'll retire it. Joe Barbera didn't want to give up on it, and he called the staff together, and they spent a couple of weeks figuring out how to freshen the show up by adding a new element. And they, not I, they came up with Scrappy-Doo.
The gang is cowardly by design. That's the joke. They see a monster, they lose their minds, they run away. Scooby and Shaggy do their weird run, but they still stay in the same place thing. The whole deal. So if the formula is starting to get stale, then adding one new character who doesn't react the same way probably sounds smart. Give them a younger character, give them more energy, give them somebody who runs towards the monster while everyone else is trying to leave the building. And yeah, on paper, that makes sense. The problem is, I think that we're solving the wrong problem. Scooby wasn't getting old because the gang was too scared. It was getting old because audiences had been watching the same basic episode for years. Monster shows up, mystery starts, chase scene, mask comes off, it's some random guy. Again, you could swap the setting, you could swap the costume, but eventually people catch on. So adding a little nephew who wants to throw hands with a ghost doesn't exactly solve that. It's just adding a new flavor to a formula people are already getting tired of and hoping that's enough to buy the show a little more time. But if you're sitting in a meeting and somebody's pointing at the chart and saying the ratings are dropping, I get why this sounds like the answer. Nobody in that room planned to make the most annoying character ever. They thought they were helping. That's the part that makes this interesting. Scrappy didn't come off as some evil, cynical plan. Scrappy came out of a very normal creative instinct. Okay, this thing isn't working like it used to, fix it.
You are here today, Scrappy?
Let's go back to 1979. For most Americans, TV basically meant three networks: ABC, NBC, and CBS. Cable existed, sure, but it was nowhere near the center of culture yet, and you definitely weren't living in a world where every niche had its own channel. If you were a kid waking up on Saturday mornings, the choices were a lot narrower than they are now, and that made Saturday mornings matter a lot. It had become one of the main blocks for children's TV in the United States. You had a shot at a huge, dependable audience of kids all watching basically at the same time. In that kind of environment, make it more kid-friendly starts to sound less like an artistic decision and more like a practical one. If Scooby-Doo was starting to feel old, repetitive, or maybe just a little too familiar, then adding a younger, louder character would probably be the obvious way to freshen it up without having to reinvent the entire show. And that's where Scrappy starts to make sense. He's younger, he's louder, he's smaller. You don't need to explain Scrappy-Doo to a little kid. He just shows up already yelling and trying to fight the monster. You get it immediately. Now, there was never an actual memo somewhere saying add a younger character to pull in younger viewers, but the broader context makes it pretty easy to understand. Scooby-Doo was aging, Saturday mornings was competitive, children's TV was under both business pressure and cultural scrutiny, and Scrappy was a kind of solution that sounded smart before anybody had to live with them. It's hard to explain now just how much of a thing Saturday mornings used to be. We talk about appointment TV now like it started with the prestige drama, like people working their schedules around Breaking Bad or Game of Thrones releases. But for kids growing up from the 70s to early 2000s, appointment TV meant Saturday mornings. That was a ritual. There was a schedule, a real one. You knew what shows you're waiting for, what came before it, and what came after. And once the block was over, that was it. The cartoons were done. The network moved on to something else, and your little weekly event was over. And the networks absolutely treated it like an event. They weren't just tossing cartoons into the void and hoping for the best. They built lineups, moved time slots around, premiered new shows hard, and even ran preview specials for fall Saturday morning schedules like they were launching a new season of actual TV. Because they were. ABC did that for years. That's how seriously this stuff was taken. This matters because Scooby-Doo wasn't just sitting there in some timeless cartoon vacuum. It was in a competition, direct competition. Same morning, same audience, same handful of channels, all trying to grab the same kids before they wandered off to do something else. And when you look at the broader shape of children's TV around that time, I can kind of see why Scooby-Doo might have started to feel a little old-fashioned. Not bad or dead, just older. It's a mystery show first, comedy second. There's setup, there's pacing, and there's an actual reveal at the end that's supposed to matter. And if you compare that to a lot of the louder, faster, more action-heavy cartoons, I can see why people in charge might have looked at Scooby and thought, yeah, maybe this needs more energy. That's where Scrappy makes perfect sense. He is energy. That's basically the whole pitch. He talks louder, moves faster, charges at problems, and pushes scenes forward by refusing to be scared of anything. If you're a studio or a network trying to freshen up an aging show without throwing out the whole formula, that probably sounds like a smart move. The problem is they were solving the symptoms instead of the actual problem. If Scooby-Doo felt slow by the end of the 70s, that wasn't just because the gang needed a louder character. It was because the show belonged to a format that people were starting to fully understand. The formula was familiar, and once a formula gets too familiar, adding one little chaotic guy doesn't really fix the deeper issue. It just makes the formula louder.
It's the maid Scoob, who happens to be a zombie.
Scrappy-Doo made his debut on September 22nd, 1979, when Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo premiered on ABC. And from the jump, you can see exactly what they were trying to do with him. Scrappy is basically built as the opposite of Scooby and Shaggy. Where they retreat, he charges in. Where they hesitate, he commits. Where everyone else would rather be literally anywhere else, Scrappy is thrilled to be there and ready to fight a ghost for reasons only he understands. Puppy power shows up almost immediately, which really tells you everything you need to know. That is the character's thesis right there. He is loud, fearless, aggressive, and absolutely convinced that every problem on Earth can be solved by squaring up. And what's interesting looking back now is that the very first version of Scrappy is actually handled with a lot more restraint than his reputation would make you think. In that original 1979 format, the full gang is there. Fred, Daphne, Velma, Scooby, Shaggy, everybody's present. The mystery structure is still intact. Scrappy's not there to completely hijack the show yet. He's only there to kick things forward whenever the usual dynamic starts to stall. And honestly, as a function, that makes sense. I'm not saying he was perfect, but he did the most important thing. He worked, or at least he worked enough. Mark Evner said it himself that Scrappy boosted the ratings and helped keep the show going for a few more years. So from the network and studio perspective, that's a win. Maybe not a permanent one, maybe not a perfectly understood one, but definitely a win. And once something works, the instinct is always the same. Do more of that. And that's where it starts getting really interesting, because focusing harder on Scrappy did not look like a bad idea at the time. If the audience responded, then of course the thinking becomes, okay, lean into it. Give them more Scrappy. Put them in the marketing. Push them harder. That logic's not crazy. It's just commercial entertainment doing what commercial entertainment does. The problem is, Ratings don't always tell you why something works. They just tell you that for at least some period of time, something did. Did kids love Scrappy specifically? Did they just respond to the novelty of the show changing at all? Did the new season get enough attention that lapsed viewers came back to check it out? Did some of the viewers leave again a few weeks later? Well, unless you got better records than I was able to find, you can't really know. You just know that the visible change is the one that got the credit. And for a while, that made Scrappy a success story. He wasn't just a weird new addition anymore. He was being treated like the fresh face of a franchise that had been around for a decade. And if you're a kid who met Scooby through Scrappy, then none of the later backlash would have made much sense. To you, this wasn't some failed experiment. This was just a show. That was the plan. That was the idea. Get a new wave of kids to cycle out the old one. For a real stretch of time, it worked. Scrappy worked. The step after this worked is always, okay, do more of that. And in Scrappy's case, more ended up meaning reworking the entire show around him. Because once you get into the early 80s, Scooby-Doo changes a lot. The original version of the show was built around full-length mysteries. You had a beginning, middle, and end. Time to set things up, time to let the game be wrong, time to build atmosphere, time to drag out the reveal just long enough for it to feel like an actual reveal. The newer format chopped that down. Instead of one full mystery, you started getting these short segments, 7 minutes, sometimes barely more than that, where the whole job is basically set up the problem, run around, make some jokes, wrap it up, and move on. And to be fair, Scrappy fit that format way better than the old one. In a longer mystery, his whole deal can be exhausting. He never stops. He's always yelling, always charging forward, always trying to turn every situation into a fight scene. In a short segment though, that same energy works way better because the cartoon is over before he has time to wear you out. At the same time, the rest of the gang starts quietly fading away. Fred, Velma, and Daphne, who had been there from the start, stop being regulars once the short era kicks in. For a while, the show was mostly Scooby, Shaggy, and Scrappy, which is not a tiny adjustment. That's a completely different group dynamic. Now, I can sit here and guess why that happened. Fewer characters is cheaper, it's simpler, it's easier to build shorts around, but whether that's the exact reason or not, the end result is the same. The show gets stripped down to its most functional parts. There's also a third change that doesn't get enough attention. They get rid of the reveal. In the original show, the monster was always a person. Always. You get to the end, the mask comes off, and it's some guy. A greedy developer, a jealous neighbor, someone with a motive and costume, and a plan that somehow required him haunting an entire building for weeks. That reveal was the payoff. It's what made it a mystery. Starting in the 1980s, the shorts switched to real supernatural villains, actual monsters. No reveal, no unmaskings, no, and I would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for you.
Meddling kids.
Which sounds fine on paper. Real monsters are scarier than guys in rubber suits, technically, but it quietly removed the things that made the genre work. If the monster is real, there's nothing to figure out. There's no mystery. You're just watching 3 characters run away from something that actually wants to eat them, which is fundamentally a different show. And that changes what Scooby-Doo even is, because classic Scooby is not just dog chases monster. It worked because the ensemble. Fred is the guy pretending he has a plan. Daphne is usually one wrong turn away from getting kidnapped. Velma is the only person remotely qualified to solve anything. Shaggy and Scooby are terrified, selfish, and somehow still end up actually doing the dangerous part. That's the texture of the show. That's where a lot of the personality comes from. Once you shrink the cast and shrink the runtime, a lot of the texture disappears. You're left with the most basic version of the formula: chase, joke, resolution. The brand is still there, the name is still there, but it starts feeling like a thinner version of Scooby-Doo. Not necessarily awful, just less. And I think that's the part people were reacting to before they even had the language for it. The show still looked like Scooby-Doo, but it didn't feel like Scooby-Doo anymore.
Sounds like Daphne.
The clearest way to explain what went tonally wrong is to look at a specific episode. In early Scooby, in Escape from the Outer Space Ghost, the show does a really good job setting the mood before anything actually happens. You hear the sounds first, then footsteps, then those glowing green footprints left behind. And the whole time, the episode is just letting the tension build. The gang feels it, Scooby and Shaggy feel it, and you feel it too, even before a monster even shows up on screen. The tension's there. That's how old Scooby-Doo worked. It understood that comedy landed better when the fear came first. You let the scene breathe, you let the silence hang there for a second, and then you break it with a joke. Now, watch a scene from the Scrappy era. The gang encounters something threatening. Scrappy immediately squares up with it. He announces that he's about to splat whatever it is. He charges. The scene becomes action comedy before there was any attention ever to release. The joke is happening where the dread used to be. The thing about a joke is that it needs something to push against. Comedy works by letting pressure off. If there's no pressure, if that scary thing was never actually scary, then the joke doesn't land. You're not relieved, you're just watching a small dog run at things. Scooby-Doo, for all of his silliness, understood this. The original show was structured around fear. The characters were generally avoidant. When they did something brave, it felt like something, because you'd watch them try not to for the whole episode. That bravery was earned by the cowardice that preceded it. Scrappy broke that circuit. He arrived in every scene already committed to confrontation. There was no build-up because he didn't do build-up. There was no hesitation because Scrappy had already checked it out and declared war on it, which meant that every scene that he was in had the tension diffused before it could develop. You couldn't be scared of something Scrappy wasn't scared of. He was right there telling you it was fine because he was going to punch it. For one episode, this works. It brings new energy and a different approach. But after 50 episodes, it changes how you watch the show. You stop expecting tension because you know it won't happen. You're not surprised by the monster because Scrappy has already charged at it. The mystery stops feeling mysterious because the character's supposed to be scared isn't showing any fear. Without that, the whole genre quietly falls apart. There's also another effect, what Scrappy does to Scooby himself. Scooby-Doo's whole thing is he's a big cowardly dog. That's the joke, that's his character. His fear is what makes his rare moments of bravery stand out, but if you put Scrappy next to him for long enough, Scooby's cowardice starts to seem like a weakness instead of a feature. He begins to look like the sidekick's sidekick. The show named after him quietly turns him into the weakest link. To be direct, this is a huge mistake in character development. The main character becomes a liability and no one seems to notice because the new character brought in better ratings for a while. By the time people realized what had happened, the change was already set.
Wow, I haven't seen...
Look away, Daphne. We all promised each other that we would never speak of him. Not ever.
Here's where things get a little weird, because the way people talk about Scrappy-Doo now is not really the same way people reacted to him back then. When Scrappy first showed up, it wasn't like the entire planet immediately agreed that he was the worst thing to ever happen to Scooby-Doo. The reaction was a lot messier than that. Some kids liked him, some people probably thought the extra energy helped the show. Some people hated him right away, sure, but it wasn't the instant universal, oh my god, they ruined the show moment people kind of pretend it is now. A lot of people probably just watched it because it was on, which I know sounds like I'm underselling it, but it's kind of how TV used to work. It's Saturday morning, you're a kid, the cartoon is on, you watch the cartoon. The real hatred built later, because what people ended up reacting to wasn't just Scrappy himself, it was what happened to the show around Scrappy. More of him, less of everybody else. Shorter stories, less mystery, more noise, more running around, more of the show slowly turning into something that really didn't feel like Scooby-Doo anymore. And that kind of thing usually doesn't blow up all at once. It's the kind of thing that builds in the background until one day you look up and go, wait, why does this feel off now? By the late 80s, Scrappy was basically on the way out, and the franchise starts drifting back to the older version of itself. Longer mysteries, more of the original gang, more of the stuff people actually liked in the first place. Nobody came out and said, okay, maybe we pushed a little too far. They just quietly stopped doing it. And that's when the reputation really started to stick. Because once that era is over, Scrappy stops being just a character and starts becoming a scapegoat. He becomes the thing people point at when they talk about how Scooby-Doo drifted away from itself. Whether that was completely fair or not almost doesn't matter at that point. He's the face people remember, and if you're the face people remember, congratulations, you're probably getting blamed for it all. And then the 2002 live-action Scooby-Doo movie came out, and whatever gray area was left in Scrappy's reputation pretty much vanished, because that movie does not treat Scrappy like some misunderstood side character who just got a bad rap. Nope, it just makes him a villain, straight up. The gang broke up, everyone's bitter, the movie's already playing around with the idea that this version of Scooby-Doo is kind of damaged, and the big reveal is, yeah, the little guy did it. Scrappy's the bad guy. He's been holding a grudge this whole time and now he's back for revenge. And look, that is funny. I'm not even going to pretend it isn't. On a purely mean-spirited joke level, that is kind of incredible. And regardless of what James Gunn personally thought of Scrappy, the movie clearly knew where the culture was at. By 2002, Scrappy was already the punchline. The film just took the reputation and turned it into the plot. The joke landed, people got it immediately. But that movie did way more damage to Scrappy's reputation than I think people realize. Because after that, it wasn't just fans dunking on Scrappy anymore. Now there was a huge mainstream Scooby-Doo movie basically turning the joke into canon. Not canon in the nerdy, this permanently rewrites a timeline sense, but canon in the much more important cultural sense, where now the biggest version of Scooby-Doo most people have seen in years was telling them, yeah, actually, Scrappy was the problem. And once that happens, good luck recovering from it, because now every retrospective, every joke, every worst character ever conversation has an easy point of reference. You don't even have to explain the backlash anymore, the movie did it for you. And it doesn't stop there, even later stuff like Velma circle back to the exact same joke, which is almost more telling than the joke itself. By that point, hating Scrappy wasn't even new anymore, it was just inherited. So all that older context starts getting buried even deeper. The ratings bumps matters less, the original context matters less, the fact that Scrappy actually worked for a while even matters less. What people remember is that the franchise brought him back and made him evil, which is a lot to pin on a cartoon puppy whose main crime was having way too much confidence. Scrappy-Doo did not ruin Scooby-Doo. That's the thing. The show kept going. It's still going. Whatever damage was done in the early 80s, the franchise survived it. What Scrappy actually did was reveal something about how the show worked by breaking it. The cowardice wasn't a flaw, it was the engine. The show's mystery format wasn't a problem, it was the product. The ensemble wasn't optional, it was the point. You don't always know what a thing is until you watch someone try to fix it. Scrappy was the fix. He worked for a while on the metrics that made sense at the time, and then the metrics stopped mattering, and what was left was a show that had quietly drifted away from what had made it worth watching. Not with a bang, just gradually. Turns out, that's how most things fall apart. Not a monster under a mask, just a series of very reasonable decisions that nobody thought to question until it was too late. So, were we too hard on the little guy? Who knows? Hey guys, if you made it this far in the video, first of all, thank you so much. Two, if you could do the YouTube stuff, the like and subscribe and support the video, that'd be awesome. But more importantly, let me know in the comments below what you guys thought about Scrappy growing up. I'm really curious. Anyway, thanks.
I would have gotten away with it too, if not for your meddling sons of